He gave her a room and Job out of pity, then caught himself waiting at the window for her. The sky hung low, copper and bruised, the kind of evening where silence pressed against the skin like heat. Dust whirled through the empty alleys of a frontier town that no longer seemed to breathe. Shutters slammed against saloon windows, their hinges creaking like bones. Somewhere a dog barked once, then was swallowed by quiet. Down the main street rolled a wagon, old, splintered wood groaning. As the wheels dragged across ruts baked hard by sun, it carried nothing of value. Only a figure slumped beneath a tattered blanket. She looked less alive than carried by some cruel mercy of fate. Clothes torn, skin streaked with soot, hair tangled into ash. Her eyes, wide, hollow, stared at nothing, the way a child's doll might after being dropped into the rain. She had lost all of it. The house where laughter once filled the rafters, the family whose voices burned away with the fire, the land her people called sacred. What remained of her was ash and silence. Rumors clung to her shoulders before she even stepped down. Word spread faster than dust on the wind. Cursed, some said. Touched by misfortune. A girl who drags fire with her shadow. Men at the saloon spat tobacco, muttering that death follows such wanderers. Women drew their shawls tighter. No one wanted to take her in, except the man watching from the edge of the world. He leaned against the porch rail of his ranch, broad, shoulders etched with the posture of someone who had carried weight too long. The ranch stretched wide behind him, miles of dry pasture, fences leaning tiredly, a barn that smelled of old hay and loneliness. His face was carved by scars time, never let heal. One down his jaw, another hidden beneath the brim of his hat. His name carried no song, no legend, just a soldier turned rancher, a man who lived with ghosts. His nights had been filled with nothing but the sound of wind clawing at window glass. His mornings were chores, his evenings whiskey, his company the coyotes who circled the far hills. Life had hardened him into silence, but when he saw her, the girl stumbling down from the wagon, body small against the backdrop of sky, something twisted in him. Not pity alone. Something heavier, sharper, a guilt he couldn't name. He did not speak right away. Instead, he watched as she stood uncertain on the dirt street, the crowd parting from her like she carried plague. Her knees buckled once, caught herself, then walked with that hollow determination of someone who no longer fears falling. By dusk, she reached the ranch. She didn't knock, didn't ask. She just stood in the long shadow of the barn, eyes glazed as if she wasn't sure if this was real ground or another dream from the fire. He stepped down from the porch, boots crunching in dry soil. For a moment they simply stared at each other, the scarred rancher and the girl made of ash. No words could name the distance between them. Finally, his voice, rough like gravel breaking. "You hungry?" She blinked, a hesitation, then the faintest nod. He led her inside. The house smelled of wood smoke and iron pots left too long on the stove. He poured water into a tin cup, slid it across the table. Her hands trembled as they closed around it. She lifted it slowly, lips barely touching the rim, as if even water might betray her. Later, by the fire, he set bread and beans before her. She stared at them, unblinking, the flicker of flame reflected in her wide, glassy eyes. The silence between them grew heavy, pressing like a storm in the walls. "Eat," he muttered, voice low, almost an order. Her lips parted. The words came hollow, broken. "I can't taste anything." He looked at her, really looked. The firelight made her face seem carved from sorrow itself. Something inside him stirred, something he thought long buried under dust and time. That night, he gave her a room above the barn, a mattress, thin as parchment, a blanket patched with holes. He told himself it was nothing, just shelter, a place to sleep. But when she lay down, eyes still open, watching the ceiling beams as though flames might crawl across them again, he lingered at the doorway longer than he should have. Outside, the wind rose, scattering dust across the fields. A hawk circled once in the fading light before disappearing into the dark. In his chest, the silence felt different, no longer empty, but heavy, as if the storm had finally found its way to his porch. And for the first time in years, he didn't sleep easy. He sat at his window, listening to the barn creak, waiting without knowing why. Nights on the ranch carried their own kind of silence, vast, heavy, almost sacred. The land stretched wide under a bowl of black sky, pricked with stars that felt too far away to belong to this earth. Coyotes howled from the hills, their cries sharp, lonely. The wind moved through the grass like a whisper, rattling the loose boards of the barn. A lantern burned there most evenings. Its glow flickered through the slats, casting a trembling light across the dirt yard. And inside that light, her shadow moved, thin, restless, always working. She mucked stalls with the quiet efficiency of someone who had known labor her whole life. Her arms trembled sometimes, but she never stopped. She calmed the wild colts with hands still scarred, voice soft enough to settle their nerves, even as her own body shook. Leather creaked under her touch as she stitched torn harnesses, thread slipping through her fingers like lines of prayer. When smoke drifted faint from the hills, a neighbor burning brush piles, her whole body went rigid. The smell clawed at her throat. She would pause, drop the needle, close her eyes. Then, steadying herself, she'd continue. From the house window, he watched, always from a distance. The rancher's shadow leaned long against the glass, his face carved by firelight. What had begun as pity, offering her food, shelter, work, was becoming something heavier, something unnamed. He told himself it was concern, duty. The truth pressed deeper. Sometimes he caught faint sounds drifting up from the barn. A low hum, then words, foreign to his ear but heavy with sorrow. She sang in her mother tongue, soft, broken, almost a prayer. It wasn't a song for anyone to hear. It was a song to keep from breaking apart. He stood at his window, listening as though he could gather the pieces of her story through those cracked notes. His own story bled into the night with hers. Long before the ranch, before scars and silence, he had been a soldier. He carried with him the smell of powder and smoke, the sound of men crying out on fields that drank blood too easily. His scars weren't only on skin, they sat deep, carved into his chest where guilt refused to fade. He had been part of battles that left villages in ruins, families scattered. Though he didn't know her story yet, he didn't need to. He recognized the fracture in her eyes. It mirrored his own. By day, their words were few. She asked nothing of him. He asked nothing of her. Work was enough. But silence between two broken souls carries weight. Her silences told stories he couldn't quite reach. His silences answered in kind. Once, late in the evening, she stepped into the yard, lantern swinging at her side. The glow caught her face, her eyes reflecting gold. She lifted the lantern high to check the latch on the corral gate. From the porch, he saw her framed in light, small against the black spread of night. For a moment, it looked as if the lantern wasn't just flame but something more, like her carrying a piece of the world still unburned. He stayed on the porch longer than he should have, hat in his hands, breath heavy. When she noticed him, she didn't speak. Neither did he. She lowered the lantern, and the shadows swallowed her again. The barn light became ritual. Each night, it burned until long after the stars had shifted overhead. It stood as a beacon in the dark, an unspoken tether between them. She worked beneath it. He watched it from afar. Neither crossed the distance, though both felt its pull. One night, rain rolled in from the west. The storm spread wide, thunder cracking, lightning tearing the horizon in white fire. The barn swayed under the wind, lanterns swinging wildly. He rose from his chair, ready to step outside, but froze when he saw her through the glass, still working, still steady. She didn't flinch under the storm. The rain poured, rattling roof tin, but she held her place, light flickering across her hands. For the first time in years, he felt something stir that wasn't guilt, wasn't sorrow. It was fragile, almost dangerous. Midnight came. The storm eased, leaving only the sound of water dripping from eaves and coyotes crying far off. He stood at the window, bare hand pressed against the cold pane. Across the yard, the lantern's glow still burned faint, stubborn. Her shadow moved once, more against the barn wall than stilled. He did not know why he waited for it. Yet he stayed, breath fogging the glass, until her silhouette faded and the barn light finally went dark. And in the silence that followed, he realized the emptiness he had lived with all these years was no longer empty. It was filling with something he did not dare name. The saloon in town never stayed quiet long. Whiskey loosened tongues and men needed something to chew on besides tobacco. Lately, their words circled around her. "She don't belong here," one muttered, spit darkening the sawdust floor. "Like a stray coyote setting itself on a Christian porch," another laughed, slapping the table. The laughter was sharp, bitter. They called her Trouble, a curse dressed as a girl. Some swore she'd bring fire down on anyone fool enough to keep her close. And the man keeping her close, him, the scarred rancher, earned suspicion with every passing day. Drifters began riding the edges of his land. Men with eyes too sharp, voices too casual. They leaned on fence posts, whistled at the horses, asked questions that weren't theirs to ask. Bounty seekers and bitter souls, sniffing for weakness. The air itself seemed to carry their whispers, dust rolling with unease. He warned her one evening, voice flat but heavy. "They'll come sniffing. Don't answer their eyes." She didn't flinch. Her reply was soft, steady, carved from steel beneath the ash. "I've lived through fire. Men don't scare me." Her words struck him, but fear coiled in his chest all the same. That night, shots cracked in the hills. Not close, not far. Just enough to be heard, enough to send a message. A hawk circled overhead the next morning, wings wide against the sun, as if waiting for carrion. The land seemed to hold its breath. He lay awake nights, torn. Keeping her meant painting a target across them both. Sending her away felt like betrayal carved into bone. Every choice seemed like a road into ruin. The silence between them grew taut, strung with something neither dared name. When he passed, her in the barn, their eyes lingered too long. When her hand brushed his while passing a tool, a spark leapt unbidden. The space between them grew smaller, yet the distance wider. Storm clouds gathered one night, black and swollen. Thunder tore the sky open. Rain lashed the earth, hammering the roof of the barn where she worked late. He found her there. Lantern. Shaking in her hand, body rigid as lightning lit the rafters. Memories clawed at her, fire, screams, the crack of burning wood. She crumpled, knees folding, her breath ragged. He was beside her in an instant, awkward, tender, raw. His arms wrapped around her small frame, her body trembling like a foal in the cold. He lifted her, carried her through the storm, rain streaming from his hat brim, soaking them both. Inside the house, he laid her gently on his own bed. For the first time, she rested not in the barn loft, but beneath the roof that had long sheltered. Only him. The room smelled of pine wood and smoke, quiet but heavy. He sat on the edge, unsure, scarred hands trembling. She reached blindly, fingers grazing his hand. He let her touch linger, their skin rough against rough. His thumb brushed her knuckles, emotion small yet searing. The air between them filled with heat, not from fire or storm, but from the closeness neither had sought yet both had feared. They did not speak. Words would have broken it. Outside, thunder split the night, rattling the glass. Inside, the silence was a storm of its own, charged, dangerous, forbidden. He withdrew finally, standing, heart pounding. She turned her face into the pillow, eyes closed, body still trembling but calmer under the weight of safety. He lingered at the doorway, shadow long across the wall. Outside, the storm raged on. The world pressed closer, their fragile sanctuary, trembled, its walls no longer enough to keep the danger, or their own hearts, at bay. Morning broke pale and brittle, the kind of light that softened nothing. He saddled the horses without words, his movements practiced, deliberate. She watched. From the barn doorway, hands folded, waiting for explanation that never came. At last, he nodded toward the hills. "Ride with me." They followed a trail that wound through dry grasslands, the sun climbing higher, heat bending the horizon into ripples. Neither spoke. The sound of hooves on hard earth was steady, almost a heartbeat. Dust rose behind them, swallowed by wind. By afternoon, the land fell into shadowed cliffs, and there it was. The Snake River. Narrow and winding, it moved slow, water catching the light like shards of broken glass. Reeds bent along its banks, whispering in the breeze like prayers too. Soft for heaven to hear. Birds scattered as they approached, their cries echoing into the sky. He dismounted, tied his reins loosely to a branch. She followed, steps tentative, boots sinking into damp soil. The river seemed to draw her, its current carrying memories as heavy as stones. For a while they just stood there, side by side, watching water slip past. Then her voice came, low and fragile, as if torn from somewhere she had tried to keep sealed. "My village burned." He turned slightly, but she kept her eyes on the river. They came at night. Soldiers, men in blue. Fire spread faster than screams. My father tried to fight. They shot him where he stood. My mother pushed me and my sister into the dark, told us to run. We ran until the air tore from our lungs. I looked back once. Everything was gone. Flames taller than the trees. I never saw my mother again. My sister. Her throat closed and she pressed her hand hard against her mouth. He didn't speak. Silence weighed heavier than words. "They took her," she whispered. "Men with guns. I don't know if she lives. I only know I kept running. And the fire never left. It sits here." She pressed her palm against her chest. "Every breath. Tastes of smoke. I feel like I'm walking through daylight as a ghost." The reeds bent in the breeze. The river slid past, carrying her confession downstream. His jaw tightened, eyes burning against the horizon. He wanted to speak, to tell her she wasn't alone in ghosts, but words caught in his throat, for he knew what she did not. Once, long ago, he had worn the same blue coat as the men who burned her world. His unit had ridden through villages like hers. He hadn't lit the torches, hadn't fired the first shots, but he had been there. He had not stopped it. He had looked away, the guilt pressed like a stone on his chest, heavy, immovable. He stayed silent, letting the river speak for him. Beside him, she wiped her face roughly, anger flickering beneath her sorrow. "You ask why I do not fear men. I have already lived, through the worst of them." He turned toward her then. Her face was wet, streaked with pain, but her eyes were alive, dark, unbroken. And something inside him cracked. He reached, not daring full touch, but his hand hovered near her shoulder. She met him halfway, placing her hand instead on his cheek, fingers brushing against the scar that carved his jaw. Her voice was a whisper, soft yet fierce. "I don't love skin. I love what breathes under it." The words struck deep than any bullet. He closed his eyes, her hand warm against scars he had long hated. For a moment, the world stilled. The river mirrored them. Two broken figures. Reflected side by side, shadows joined though neither dared name it. But peace never lingers on land like this. The horses stamped suddenly, ears pricking. Across the riverbank, figures emerged. Riders. 3, maybe 4. Hats pulled low, rifles slung across saddles. Their eyes found the pair at once, sharp and hungry. The rancher's hand fell to the revolver at his hip. The girl stiffened, drawing back, breath ragged. "Who are they?" she whispered. "Bounty men," he answered flatly. His gaze never left them. "Been circling too close for too long." One of the riders raised a hand in greeting, false and mocking. Another spit into the river, laughter carrying across the water. "They're not here for me," she said, voice trembling. He looked at her, jaw tight. "They're here for what you're worth, dead or alive." Her hand gripped his sleeve. Fear flickered in her eyes, but beneath it burned resolve. He felt it. The same fire that had carried her through ashes. The riders turned their horses along the far bank, keeping pace. Their shadows stretched long in the lowering sun. Watching, waiting. The river, once quiet, now felt like a line drawn in sand. One side sanctuary, the other threat. The chase had begun, even if no shot had yet been fired. He mounted, pulling her up swiftly behind him. The horses shifted, restless, sensing the storm to come. He cast one last glance at the riders, across the water. Then, spurring his horse hard, he led them away from Snake River, dust rising behind them like smoke. The reeds bent again in the wind, whispering prayers no one would hear. The first sign was the dust. A low haze rolled along the horizon, curling, up from pounding hooves. By sundown it was clear. Riders, a pack moving fast, cutting straight for the ranch. The air itself seemed to tighten, every breath dragging grit into the lungs. He stood in the yard, shotgun cradled in his arms, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. She came running from the barn, hands already shaking. "They've found us. Reckon they have." His voice was calm, too calm, the sound of a man who had been here before. The wind carried the smell of storm and sweat. Horses screamed from the corral, kicking against their pens as if they too knew what was coming. The girl turned to him, her dark hair whipped wild by the wind. "What do we do?" He looked at her for the briefest moment, and in that look was Abba. The whole truth. He didn't plan to survive. But aloud he said, "We stand." By the time the riders broke the ridge, the world had gone dry and brittle, sky painted in iron light. 10, maybe more, faces shadowed, guns glinting. Dust rose, around them like smoke from hell. The rancher and the girl pressed their backs to the barn, rifles ready. The lantern inside swung on its hook, casting fevered light through the cracks in the wood. Then the first shot cracked. The sound split the air like dry timber snapping. A bullet slammed into the barn wall inches from her head, showering splinters. Across her face, she gasped but did not flinch. The rancher fired back, the recoil jarring his shoulder. A rider toppled, horse screaming as it veered. The rest came harder, guns roaring, hooves pounding, the yard filled with smoke and thunder. She reloaded for him, hands fumbling but fast. Another shot rang. A second rider fell. But then the pain came, sudden, sharp. He staggered back, hand pressed to his shoulder, where blood spread hot and wide across his shirt. She caught him before he dropped, her voice fierce. "Stay with me." "Don't waste breath," he muttered, teeth gritted. Gunfire still cracked around them, rounds tearing. Into the barn. Horses screamed, chickens scattered in a frenzy of feathers. The ranch itself seemed to bleed. "Run," he rasped, shoving the rifle toward her. Her grip tightened. "No. They'll kill us both." Her eyes burned, her voice cutting clean as lightning. "Then I'll die where someone waited for me." For a moment, time stopped. Then she lifted the rifle, steady in a way she had never been. Her fear burned away, leaving something sharp beneath it. She braced, aimed, and fired. One rider jerked sideways, falling from the saddle. She worked the bolt, fired again. Another man slumped forward, reins slipping from his hands. The rancher, weak but grinning through the blood, whispered, "Atta girl." The fight dragged on, sweat dripping, lungs burning, each bullet a heartbeat. The night itself seemed to close around them, the barn light flickering like a beacon through smoke. At last, the tide began to turn. The riders, fewer now, pulled back, circling in hesitation. One cursed loud enough to carry across the yard. Another shouted retreat. Their shapes blurred into the storm of dust they had raised. Then silence. Only the wind moved, carrying the stench of powder and blood. The girl lowered the rifle, arms trembling now that it was done. She turned to him. He was slumped against the barn, blood soaking his side, face pale in the lantern glow. "No, no," she whispered, pressing her hands against his wound. "Don't you leave me." He coughed, managed a crooked smile. "Takes more than lead to put me in the ground." Tears cut clean streaks down her dust-covered cheeks. She bound him with what cloth she had, hands steady though her whole body shook. The barn smoldered where stray shots had struck, beams charred, smoke curling into the starless sky. The yard was littered with emptiness, hoofprints, bloodstains, shadows where bodies had fallen. The ranch was scarred. He was broken. And she was no longer the trembling girl who had come through fire. Tonight she had stood and fought, and in her defiance, something unspoken had bound them tighter than any vow. As the lantern swayed inside, its glow spilling through the cracks, she whispered into the night. "We lived." He reached weakly, his hand finding hers, rough palm against her fingers. "Together," he said, voice ragged. The silence after battle was deep, almost holy. Coyotes howled from the far hills, carrying the world onward, indifferent to the blood in the dust. But here, in the small circle of light cast by the barn, two souls had crossed the point of no return. There would be more riders, more storms, more nights of fear. But this night, soaked night, was theirs. Spring did not arrive all at once. It crept in slow, like a cautious rider easing down a trail. Snowmelt trickled through the gullies, carrying silt and broken twigs. Buds pushed from black branches, stubborn against the memory of frost. The ranch, scarred but breathing, stirred back to life. The fences still leaned where bullets had chewed the posts. The barn carried the smell of smoke, charred beams groaning in the wind. Yet green was rising, between cracks in the yard, along the edges of the pasture, in rows of seed she planted with patient hands. He moved slower now, his shoulders stiff, shirts stained from sweat and healing. Each morning he carried hammer and nails, patching what he could. Each evening he walked the land, boots dragging but steady, his eyes sweeping the horizon as if daring the dust to rise again. And she was always there, not as guest, not as burden, partner. She mucked stalls, mended harnesses, brushed horses until their coats shone copper in the sun. Laughter began to slip into her days, strange and startling at first, like hearing a song through walls you thought would never open. He found himself stopping in his work just to listen to it, that bright, breaking sound. By habit, his feet still carried him to the window. It had been his place once. Watching her shadow in the barn light, mistaking pity for purpose. Now, when dusk settled and lanterns swung in the rafters, she passed by the window herself. Her eyes would flick upward, catching him in the frame. The first time, he had looked away, heat rising in his scarred face, like a boy caught in trespass. But she smiled. Not mocking, not questioning, only soft, as though she had been waiting for him to stop hiding. Days lengthened, nights softened. Coyotes still sang on the ridges, but their cries no longer carried threat, only the reminder that the world kept turning. Fields pushed green under her tending, and the barn, rebuilt board by board, glowed warm again beneath the moon. One evening, beneath a sky cracked open with stars, he found her by the corral. She leaned against the fence, hair loose, eyes lifted to the heavens, as if searching for the ones who had gone before her. He stepped close, boots whispering over the dirt, and for a moment he simply stood, uncertain. She turned, and her gaze met his. No words, just the quiet between them, heavy with everything unsaid. At last, he lifted his hand, scarred, rough, still stiff with healing. She did not flinch. She reached and set her smaller hand in his, palm to skin against scar. Daylight had once seemed too sharp for such truth. But here, beneath the wide western sky, no shadow could hide them. His breath caught, his chest heavy, as if years of silence had suddenly broken. Her voice came low, steady. "We are not what the fire took." He swallowed, jaw tight, and managed only, "No, we ain't." They stood like that, tethered by hands and silence, the night around them vast and unending. Somewhere an owl called, wings cutting the dark. Come morning, the ranch smelled of earth and rain. She worked the garden rows, skirts damp at the hem. He mended the last of the fence line, pausing often to stretch his bad shoulder. When the sun broke the horizon, a hawk lifted from the ridge. Its wings stretched wide, catching gold light. No longer circling death but soaring, higher and higher, until it vanished into the clean blue. He watched it long, his breath steady. The world felt lighter somehow, though nothing had truly changed. The scars still marked the land, the past still burned behind their eyes. But something lived here now, something worth the wait. She walked up beside him, dirt on her hands, laughter still caught at the edge of her lips. He looked at her. Really looked, as if seeing for the first time. And in the silence of his heart, words rose, words he would never speak aloud but carried like prayer. I gave her a room out of pity. But she gave me back the world.